The First Law of Magic, Chapter 4, But Not Defeated. Twilight hummed softly to herself, noting just how easily the brace took her weight, distributing it perfectly while not applying too much pressure to any one point on her flank and upper leg. It really was quite the feat of magic and engineering now that she thought about it. She didn't anticipate something like it in a place like this, not when she was so far away from any unicorns capable to make runes, or any ingenious earth pony to create a brace that worked with the enchantment. She idly wondered as to what being was magically attuned enough to make the runes in the first place. The shifting weight on her back signaled her friend had grown concerned with the silence and tugged gently on the unicorn's mane.
How is it, Twilight? Is your leg feeling better? Does it hurt?
The soft, pleading tone of the being riding on her back made Twilight's proverbial heart swell. Before today, she would have written off such concern as suspicious, and asked the individual inquiring such things as to what they hoped to gain. But something about Fluttershy repelled those thoughts from even entering her mind. She was simply unable to be suspicious of such a kind soul that helped her and wanted nothing in return. The thought sent a shiver down her spine.
I finally have a real friend.
Shaking that thought away, she focused on the path ahead.
It's okay. It feels off, but it doesn't hurt.
The bunny squirmed slightly on her back.
What do you mean by odd? Are you sure it's not uncomfortable? You're walking a little funny.
The unicorn smiled gently. She really was the kindest being that she had ever known, save for maybe her mother. A sudden urge to protect such innocence swelled inside of her.
I'm just getting used to it, and by odd, I mean... I don't know, it's just weird. The weight is higher up on my leg now, so it just feels different. Not bad, though.
The bunny seemed to fret for a moment, before sighing.
Well, if you're sure... I am. Now, where were we going again?
Twilight looked around. A few feet in front of her, the well-manicured grass and trimmed trees ended, and the wild forest began. The forest quickly swallowed what little light emanated from the slowly awakening town behind them. Already they could hear the inhabitants stir in their homes, doors opening and drowsy greetings echoing out of the windows. Despite Twilight's now assuaged worries, she couldn't help but imagine some fresh horror was behind her just out of view. She knew it was probably wrong of her to think that way, but decades of propaganda and stories were hard to dismiss in a single day. She would have disregarded such worries much sooner if she knew what she was, but how could she know such a thing? She's lived her life away from the light of truth, beneath the false sun's rays. Fluttershy leaned forward, bracing herself against Twilight's long neck and pointing a tiny paw into the woods, slightly to Twilight's right.
There should be a path just inside the woods that will lead us right to her, but we should get moving. Angel's getting tired, and you should get some sleep soon as well, if you want your leg to heal.
Twilight nodded. Despite the distance that she had half walked, half stumbled already, and all the stress that she had experienced, she didn't feel the silent pull of exhaustion. Though she could feel her eyes droop occasionally, she felt no desire to stop and lay down. She hoped this mysterious being had a potion for what ailed her, and was willing to help a stranger. Normally, Twilight would have snorted dismissively at such a thought, and shook her head, but she had already learned that kindness wasn't as foreign a concept as she had thought. As she put one hoof in front of the other and waded into the woods, it suddenly occurred to her that she had nowhere to sleep. She hadn't thought about it until now, but a small part of her imagined her bed when she thought of sleep. Despite the fact that it was now many miles away in a potentially hostile environment, a native part of her just assumed that she would be sleeping in her bed, same as almost every night of her life. It was where she had slept for the last 16 years after all, minus the disastrous party that she had attended and the very few family gatherings that she partook in her youth. A small part of her died at the realization, despite knowing logically that she wasn't just gonna skip off home to bed. A piece of her only seemed to realize this fact when faced with the obvious realization that she would not be sleeping in her own bed. A tear slipped down her cheek, startling her from her reverie.
Are you okay, Twilight? If you want, we can stop for the night. There's a burrow not far from here that would be big enough for you to sleep in. It's actually pretty cozy, despite being made out of dirt and moss.
Another tear slipped down her cheek and landed on a small flower sprouting from the thick underbrush. The moment the liquid hit the plant, it began to rot, withering away to nothing within moments, vanishing into the tall surrounding grass. She breathed a deep, unnecessary breath.
I'm okay. Just thought of home, is all. You miss them, don't you?
Twilight sniffed and wiped her eyes.
I know how you feel. But it's not too late to see your brother and father, right?
Twilight nodded weakly, strength slipping from her limbs with every passing second.
If Rainbow Dash were here, she would say something that would make you determined to see them again. I kinda stink at that type of thing though, so, I just want to say that I'll help you as much as I can, if you want my help.
The bunny hugged the back of the unicorn's neck with all four of her limbs. Taking a deep breath, Twilight took a step forward. She couldn't keep breaking down like this, not when there was something that she could do, not when she had some being there to help her. With her confidence returning, she strode into the woods. She felt like she should say something or thank the bunny, but she couldn't find the words. Instead, she chose action and continued onward, Fluttershy guiding her with a well-placed tug on her mane every few minutes. Though the forest had been an active place before, now it became downright noisy. Much like the town of Ponyville, the forest itself seemed to be waking up. Every sight and sound drew another question in Twilight's mind, and before long, she was pelting her guide with questions.
What was that sound? What exactly is a manticore? How does it walk like that with just 2 legs? What kind of bird is that? What does that thing eat?
Her enthusiasm to learn was matched only by Fluttershy's love of animals, and before long, they had wandered slightly off their path, having chased down a rather rare and colorful bird that Fluttershy enthusiastically referred to as a bird of paradise. Its brightly colored plumage seemed to be every color of the rainbow as it flew. A few shafts of moonlight that poked through the tree cover made the color seem even more vibrant than Twilight had assumed was possible. Though normally she would have been worried that they were getting off course, there was something about having a whole new world to learn about and explore that captured her imagination, while Fluttershy was just about as happy to finally have some being that was as interested in animals as she was. With Fluttershy close at hoof, Twilight felt invincible, and why wouldn't she? There was a wild soul on her back that seemed to know everything about every animal that they saw, and they weren't very far from town, so it should be safe, right? But we all know what happens when one feels invincible, don't we?
Did you see the size of that snake, Fluttershy? It must have been 13 feet long! Oh, yes. The emerald vine snake grows as long and as big as this tree does, so they can grow to be much, much larger.
Fluttershy added with a smile. Twilight gasped, imagining a huge snake as long as the redwoods that she had read about. A sudden snapping sound brought her head out of the clouds, her eyes whipping over to a large bush set between them and the path that they had wandered off of. Fluttershy stiffened up, her big bunny ears swiveling to the source of the sound. Noticing the bunny's sudden tenseness, Twilight stopped moving, her own ears going up.
What is it, Fluttershy?
Twilight whispered. The bunny leaned forward, whispering directly into the unicorn's ear.
Something big, walking backwards slowly. Don't show it your back.
Twilight gulped and began backing up slowly, making sure not to trip. After a few steps, she slipped behind a large tree and out of sight of whatever creature was close by. Now relatively safe, Twilight let out a sigh of relief.
Is it following us?
Fluttershy shrugged.
I don't hear any breathing.
Suddenly, the tree that they had been using as cover vanished in a flash of claws, the top half tumbling out of the way to reveal the huge snarling face of a beast made entirely of wood. Twilight's eyes went wide and she froze in panic. Fluttershy's high-pitched scream knocked her out of it. In a flash of black light, they vanished and reappeared a few feet away. Twilight's stumbling hoof was already under her. Behind them, the wolf howled and charged, its great bulk crashing through the underbrush with ease, while the unicorn was left stumbling on awkward hooves. The creature made short work of the distance between them, and only another short, panicked teleport saved them from being sliced in half by the creature's wicked claws. The wolf stopped, sniffed once, then took off after them once more, easily catching the scent of the pair, though it had no olfactory sense organs to speak of.
What was that thing? Timberwolf?
A sharp pull on the right side of Twilight's mane was all the warning that she needed. She ducked down and to the right, and the wolf crashed through a sapling, and swung a clawed paw through where they had been a moment earlier. Twilight put her head down, ducking under a branch, all the while her legs desperately carried her forward as she thought of some way out. She had more than enough spells to destroy such a creature, but she couldn't gain enough ground for that to be possible. Her spell simply took too long, and she couldn't teleport very far. Not with a massive animated pile of wood attempting to turn her into minced meat. Maybe if she got a little more distance, she might. Her eyes shot open and she dove to the left, narrowly missing the timberwolf that had leapt upon the spot that she had been a second ago. Putting her hooves under her, she pushed her thoughts away. She really needed time to think. She ducked under a low-hanging branch and tried to tune out the bellow of rage that echoed all around her, only narrowly suppressing the desire to quiver in fear. Eyeing up a tightly packed group of trees that was just big enough for her to squeeze through, she poured up on the speed as best as her brace would allow, and dove through the narrow crack in the twisted wall of wood. A second later, she heard the timberwolf crash into the foliage, its huge bulk making the trees creak but not relent. Breathing a sigh of relief, Twilight quickly looked around. Finding what she was looking for in the form of a tall, thick tree with several large, wide branches, she fired off a quick teleport. From her new vantage point, she could see the lumbering form of the timberwolf round the other side of the tree wall, and stopped suddenly where Twilight had vanished. As quietly as she could, she whispered,
What exactly is that thing? An animal of some kind? Can you possess it?
The timberwolf snooped low to the ground below them, sniffing the forest floor, looking for its lost prey. The bunny continued to shiver, gripping Twilight's neck tighter.
It's the spirit of a lost lone wolf that doesn't know it's dead and inhabits the wood it died near. I can only borrow species that are alive and I know are nice.
Twilight's muzzle twisted into a grimace. That made things far easier, but she had no remorse for such a creature.
A simple fire spell should do the trick then.
Twilight's face twisted in concentration, and the strange black aura surrounded her horn, only to be cut short when a frantic voice stopped her just as she brushed her magic up against the wolf, measuring the distance and calculating how much power to put in the spell. A strange tingle ran down the base of her horn for a second before it was extinguished, along with Twilight's concentration.
Wait! The forest hates fire!
Twilight cursed under her breath, trusting her friend despite how crazy that it sounded.
Then what are we supposed to do?
She replied, more angrily than she intended.
Stay quiet and hope it gets bored. Its sense of smell is good, but its eyesight is poor.
Nodding to the bunny, the unicorn turned her attention down to where the wolf had been moments ago, only to blink in surprise.
Where did it go? I don't know. Twilight, this is bad. Can you do that flashy thing again? We need to get out.
A thunderous crash and the shaking of the tree interrupted the terrified bunny and sent Twilight scrambling. The pair exchanged a worried glance before looking down to find the snarling timberwolf scramble up the side of the tree only to slip back down the trunk, his claws unable to find purchase. Even then, it had managed to climb nearly halfway up before gravity won the fight and sent it tumbling back down to the ground.
Now what do we do? I don't know, I usually just run away.
The bunny tugged on Twilight's mane and pointed at the top of the tree.
Put me up there and I'll go see if I can't borrow some other creature bigger and scarier than the timberwolf.
Twilight nodded, trying to ignore the second slam and subsequent clambering against the base of the tree, as the timberwolf managed to gain a few feet, now almost able to reach the lowest branch on the tree. Twilight gulped and turned away from the snapping jaws of her pursuer and lit her horn. The bunny shivered as she was enwrapped by Twilight's magical aura, waiting patiently as Twilight carefully lifted her up and threw the branches to her destination.
Almost there. You can do it, Twilight.
Carefully, Twilight pushed on, maneuvering her small friend around the twisting branches until Fluttershy was nearly there, her tiny paws reaching out for the branch, only for the sudden shake of the tree to break her concentration. Twilight watched in panic as her small friend began to fall, her paws too small to reach any of the branches. Ignoring the sound of the timberwolf clawing its way up the tree, Twilight concentrated and grabbed the bunny in her telekinetic grip. She had seconds until the timberwolf reached the first branch, and if it got a grip from there... She chose not to think about that. All of her attention was needed on her friend. With a less than gentle push, she tossed the bunny up and towards the tallest branch where Fluttershy was just barely able to hold on to.
Twilight, watch out!
Fluttershy pointed down to where the clawing had drawn closer. Twilight spun around just in time to see the timberwolf's paw grip the branch and began to heave itself upwards. The unicorn panicked, pushing every ounce of telekinetic power into a shove. Pointing her horn down at the monstrous wolf, she pushed past her usual elegant spellcasting and simply brute forced it with as much mana as she could. That is one persistent-ass timberwolf. One would think that if their prey is going to be that much of a pain in the ass to capture, they would probably just move on to another sort of prey. But apparently not. They are much more fearsome and determined than that. Anywho, let's get on to our agile donators. Top donators Peter Coulthard, J Tin Man, Darkside, Gauntlet, and only one thing. TacoCat598, Zar630, Strix, Raiden, Narwhals, Black Moonheart, Drake Lovedragon, Pastel Skies, Austin Roland, Crazy Color 557, Stu Hex, Will, James Burner, Dospo, Delta Omega, Jack Cadge, RuneSlicer9852, Madman Stan, Leslie Perkett, Hunter Norman, Stephen Bingham, LineGod12, and many more awesome people. Thank you all so much for watching this video and live life to the fullest.